And we're back at the MIT Media Lab for the first session of the Legal Hackathon online collaboration experiment. And this session is, in fact, reflecting an interesting collaboration between our research group here, the Human Dynamics group of the MIT Media Lab and our so-called legal physics research team, and the Uniform Law Commission, who we've been collaborating with lately on an innovative exploratory use of data science in the context of uniform law. And just tickle pink to have some of the most thoughtful and senior people of the Uniform Law Commission joining us to help commence this dialogue. And I'd like to recognize and then to, I guess, pass the talking stick to Harriet Lansing, who's the president of the Uniform Law Commission this term, to introduce herself and the group and what the National Conference of Uniform Commissioners, what the National Conference of Commissioners on Uniform State Law, NACUSL, what you do and the role that you serve, so that we can maybe have some context to get started. Thank you, Harriet, and you're on.
All right, thanks, Asa, and we're very happy to be participating in this. This seems like a very vibrant exchange of ideas and systems and structures and potential ideas. Gotcha. Across the business and business-related areas. We also we range from that to the Anatomical Gifts Act, where we took the lead on anatomical gifts so that didn't go into a market type of exchange where people were paying money for organ transplants, and it became entirely a donative, gift-oriented structure. And so you see that we go across quite a range. Our probate laws, we have more than 300 acts that are in operation in across states. Minnesota, where I, in the Commissioner from, has more than 100. And you range from that to anatomical feedback, where I want to introduce the other people that just on anatomical feedback to this organization. Michelle Kim, who is on the call, and was also Commissioner for Minnesota. She's a rebadger in Minnesota in her day job, and he has been the chair of the UELMA, the Legal Materials Uniform Electronic Legal Materials Act, and she can speak from the experience of how we carefully draft laws with bringing a lot of people to the table face to face and working on them. Then we have Terry Morrow, who is our legislative director. Terry has a very substantial background in legislative knowledge. He has been a state legislator for, I think it's 4 terms, and he also has an educational background, a teaching background, and is, of course, he's a lawyer as well. Then Katie Robinson is our deputy legislative director, and Katie is the person who has, and our communications director, I should also say. She's the person who does a lot of our communications, has done a lot of background, worked on books about the history of the organization. She is our source of institutional memory and will be very valuable in discussions as we go forward. So I can ask the others to say a few words, Deza, or turn it back to you and see what you want to do now.
Well, I thank you. Oh, and I guess
Hello?
maybe I should. Do you think it would help if I hit the mute button? I don't know. It's a technical. I'm sorry about that. We're blathering away on mute. So that was. I'm glad that we're recording this. That was terrific. But I think we should, as much as I'd like to hear from everybody, we should move up a little bit now to the data scientist who we've invited to join the initial part of the discussion. And then I would like to make sure, Harriet, that we do hear from everyone if we can. But the purpose of convening this session was really to bring more people into this little dialogue we're having here, which is data scientist meets uniform law commissioner. What could possibly happen? I want to recognize Ray Campbell, who's one of the seminal kind of like thinkers that brought this research team together, and it was his insights that on big data and its relevance that really did inspire the questions and the direction of research that led to looking at the uniform law as data. And in fact, literally, he picked up the phone out of the blue. I think he cold called Katie and said, "Hi, can I have your data, more or less? My name is Ray Campbell, doing something with Daz Agreement in the Media Lab, and we were wondering if your data." It's part of a suggestion from another collaborator at Clio. And to your credit, your whole team's really responded marvelously. And you've been very gracious, and you've given us a lot of information. And Ray was able to take some things from PDF and from other data sets and formats, and slowly, it's not completely scrubbed yet. There's still some errors, but we've got a sufficiently accurate and robust data and complete data set that's in a tabular form, so that we can do some initial analytics and start to engage meaningfully data scientists. And so, with that in mind, we've done some visualizations I may show in a moment with screencast, but I'd like to invite Arik into the dialogue. Arik is recently minted PhD, right? And we share him with Denmark Technical University. He's about half-time here in the Media Lab, and Sandy Pentland's group with me, the Human Dynamics group, which is essentially a big data group. It's an analytics group focused on social science and computational rules and systems. And so, Arik, I really can't think of any finer data scientist of any vintage to have a fresh look at this. And just if you could introduce a little bit of what is data science, what's your work, and what does this look like to you? Where do you see the issues and options and the possibilities?
Hi everyone. My name is Arik. So I do work with big data. I even work with big data, which means I manipulate data that are collected in multiple sources, not necessarily just a single source. and I try to understand something mostly about how society works. And I'm interested in this, legal side of the thing because, it's possible to deny that legal documents and whatever is happening in this space is a certain manifestation of the underlying processes in the society. What is interesting is that this outcome that we are seeing, like right now I'm looking at the data shared, which is the uniform laws data set. It is nicely structured. It has, it's easy to read, it's easy to understand, it's relatively easy to analyze. At the same time, what it actually means, it may mean, it may show a very different and sometimes very complex process in the society. It's not necessarily that it will lead directly to understanding of this process, but it may give us the idea, maybe even a predictive power, to see what will happen. State A will introduce a law in certain year, and we then expect that there will be a certain follower pattern. And we expect that certain states will be much faster to introduce the same law than other states. What is the time difference between different places and different types of that? So, there are many domains and there are many dimensions, slices. But it's really interesting for me that at the end of the day, it happens not because of some magic, but it happens because there are certain processes in the society. And if you have enough data, and if your data is really good enough, it actually starts recovering in a systematic and meaningful way. Why it happens, not just what happens, but why it happens.
Wow. So just if I could just one quick follow-up, just a couple of quick examples, like say from other, the law is a social science. I know you've got much more experience, also starting with data science and the law, in psychology and in sociology to some extent, and others. Like, what are examples of how in a predictive power, but also a power of explanatory reason of why things happen?
So, just recently we used experiment in Denmark and checked how did we tomorrow. We're looking at the performance of teams environment, and we ask, does it really mean, what does it mean if you know a lot of people in the entire class? Does it matter that you know those people very well? What does it mean for your performance in the group? So you're solving a task, you are group, and how you're positioned in the network of all those other students influences your performance. So you can think about the network of all the states or all the cities, and those states or all cities are connected through many channels. Maybe first on a personal level, the people in the government, how they are connected, how much idea flow. Things are happening something informal and formal level. So what we found out is that what really matters is your strongest type for your performance. It doesn't matter how many kind of friends or how many acquaintances you have. What really matters for the idea flow performance is just strongest ties. So this way, looking at two relatively simple signals, performance group and your position in the network, we're able to start understanding what are the possible channels and what is the nature of communication in this environment.
Thank you, Art. And so I know those dense words, every sentence there has a lot behind it. If you want to see examples of what Art's talking about, come to hd.media.mit.edu. That's for human dynamics. hd.media.mit.edu, and you can see some of Art's work and other data scientists here, and Sandy Pentland's work on mapping social systems and predictive modeling and some other statistical computational techniques for social science that show some of the subtle interactions and can allow us to model them and then begin to work with them. So with that, I'd like to just, first of all, let you know that Dave is with us now, and we have another speaker as well to do a deeper dive into ULMA. But before we go deeper into one of these uniform laws, I'd like to stay at this higher level for a bit longer, and maybe a couple of cycles with you at the Commission and our data scientists here on the possibilities. Because the uniform law has the great element of being a national system, in fact. And so there's some real opportunity there to think about flow, and it also has a great benefit of being from a single source of origin, which means that we now have a place we can look for data. We can have a place where we can begin doing some measurements, and so it would be terrific to hear more of your questions or observations.
Are you asking me, does it?
Oh, and can you hear us there, Harriet and team?
We can. We're sort of pausing over this.
Oh, yeah. Of course. I hardly asked you a crisp question either, did I? May I reframe?
Well, you may indeed. Let's help reframe.
Yes. And so, where do you believe the value could be, and what insights that would be important could we potentially derive from applying data science to uniform law?
Right. For us, we're practical in certain respects, although we like to believe that we're capable of being an overview and in some respects, can see larger picture and be a little bit ethereal. But we want to know how we can do our job more efficiently, even though we are this is all legal volunteer work. It has been since 1892. No one gets paid for this, but we get our expenses paid for what we're working on, and we maintain a small and very hardworking and committed staff. So we're looking for better ideas on how to do more for less for the state. So we think about things of how can we be more effective? How can our acts, many of which we think, of course, are really superb acts and would really help states, how can we disseminate them more effectively? Like whether there's a lobbyist or a government information person within our state delegation. Each state determines the size of their delegation, but we can roughly say there are about 5 active commissioners in many states. But so do we get more of our acts enacted if we have a particular composition of commissioners? We're looking at how we strengthen our state delegations. And then we look at things like how long it takes to draft an act. We have study committees, and then we have drafting committees, and these drafting committees meet in person, they work out the language, and then at our annual meeting we read through these line by line, and we all participate in the making of this. But we want to know whether shorter acts, for instance, might be more enactable, or whether the language level that we're pitching it to, we're not doing it so much with intentionality, but just the way it comes out, whether we have a 10th grade education level or a postdoctoral, or which of our acts get more rapidly incorporated, whether that might be a component in a predictor. Then we look, one thing that this will come up more is, I think you're going to be talking about this source system, but maybe sometimes our acts are sourced from different states or ideas in different places. Are we more effective, are acts more effective coming out of a particular group of states, as well as you've identified, are there states that are more inclined to be the first to enact? So those are some of the things that we're looking at. We have a wonderful new archive at the University of Texas. So Katie has been working hard on this. We have a lot of material. We don't know how to go about harvesting that material as effectively as we can. So we're open to these ideas that you have, including the ideas I mentioned earlier that from the person from Brooklyn University who is doing wiki sites on ideas for how we should have better laws to address emergent social issues and revisions of laws. I mean, for instance, one of our acts that we're working on this year in Seattle at our annual meeting is the fiduciary access to digital assets. And I know that some of you may know about that, but essentially what happens, what's the default rule for what happens to your digital assets when you die? And it's how we work by bringing a variety of people, people dealing with these kinds of materials to the table and trying to figure out what's a sensible resolution for this and taking it back to the state and getting it enacted. But that's an example of how we're working with technological things. Also, to use technology to make us work better and ideas that are coming out of social sciences, psychology, sociology, to perfect the structure that we're trying to make for better lives within the states and the United States.
Well, that was contentful. I'm going to say you've given a lot to chew on there, and thank goodness, what part of what we're doing is we're opening our mouths wide here because we want to take a big bite and we want to be thinking about this and working on it, ruminating on it over the course of at least a semester, I'm going to say. So part of what we do now today in this hackathon this summer is going to be to take these ideas, and you've just made the case, you put some real practical questions right on the line, and to start to enumerate them and put them on our wikis and our blogs and our research agenda as for conversation and prioritization, and then start to sculpt a plan of which ones may be actionable, which ones may be worth testing, which ones are there people with the right capabilities and the timing and the resources, and see what we can take a real dive at, basically in this coming fall semester. And I've got some opportunities in my own class to carry some of this forward, and I think there's going to be other people interested in as well. I know you spoke with Vivek, who's going to be leaving us soon to be a professor elsewhere, and there's other people that are teaching. So I think we have an opportunity here to really begin a dialogue, an open inquiry. Yeah.
And I would like to hear especially from Katie and Terry on this, and Michelle as well, because she's been in the legislative session and knows about things that are happening in other states. But Terry and Katie might have very specific ideas in addition to things that they would be looking for that would really be helpful to their work.
Sure. Yeah, that would be good.
Let's Katie.
Yeah, let's please do that. Hi, Katie.
Hi there. Well, I mean, just some very, simple questions that we can put out there for the group. Does geography matter? For instance, are there certain parts of the country that are more amenable to enacting uniform laws than others? Does the length of the particular state session, does that matter? I mean, we've often found that those states that meet in year-round sessions take a lot longer than those states that have the very short sessions or that meet every other year. We've also talked about states that don't have very large drafting offices. Do they rely more on our drafting expertise, and are they more likely to enact uniform acts? You can also get into state-specific information like, population, employment rates, things like that. But I mean, we'd be interested in all of that. I don't know, Terry, if you have anything to add.
Well, that's a great list. What I would add is, does the number of lawyers in a legislature matter? Do term limits matter? Does the subject matter? Would be some of the items I would add to that list.
Okay.
And to give you a little bit of background in terms of how we function, currently we have about 15 active drafting committees or 12 active drafting committees. Then we have a larger number, I think 15 study committees studying various things. And these are really interesting things that are being studied. It's the, we're into Bitcoins and how that compares with the Uniform Commercial Code or would fit in or wouldn't fit in.
Pretty cool.
And we are trying to take some steps in this direction. And we're into media privacy. We've got an excellent study committee on that. We've got a study committee that's working on varieties of registration issues relating to firearms. We've got a study committee. We've got study committees really all over the place on really good ideas. And then they study it for a year usually, and then they make recommendations as to whether we should go to a drafting committee on it. And we've got drafting committees, in very active form, and we hold these meetings throughout the year with our commissioners and with other knowledgeable people within these areas around the United States. And there's just a lot of ideas that sort of come to the forefront, but we have those records going way back, what our study committees were, what our drafting committees were, that kind of material.
So that's extremely helpful to you. That's sort of context that is invaluable.
Maybe just to see the dialogue a little bit more, I'm putting on the screen here. Let me see if we can see it. Dave, Mara, can you see this? Is it kind of big?
It's okay.
All right. So this is just an example of something in, that we were able to, that Ray Campbell actually was able to do using, oh gosh, I'm blanking on the name, but he's got a statistical modeling tool like Tabular or something, and he's able to do, you see the data in a few different ways. This is a rendition of the basically the which uniform laws were enacted by category over time. So actually, so this is just an image, but on the actual live feed of this, you can subtract out, for example, I don't know, trusts and taxation and maybe insurance and corporations. They say some financial, economic related things, and keep family and wills and trusts or something. And then if you see if you get different adoption rates in different periods of time, or different spikes and different basic kind of just accumulation type patterns, if you will. And then I don't know if you can see this one. Is it now showing? Yeah. So here's another type of rendition. It's basically a rank relating to when one state has enacted a uniform law, a given uniform law. Got enactments of patterns for all of them, thanks to you. How likely is it that another state will have enacted that law? And so there's a model for that. And that's what this shows. And so if you kind of look, if you know how to read, what this sort of DT scores and what this means, there actually is some information here. One of the major things that I think I've drawn from some of these initial explorations was that we're going to have to think more deeply and a little bit more subtly about what are some of the other measures where when we add, I don't know, gross domestic product of a state or employment, or we add weather, I don't know, if we add what you were starting to allude to, I don't know, is it a full-time legislature or not? Could that be the most predictive? It's some of the things that you were saying, political, so many, it's hard to know it. I have a strong feeling, a supposition, intuition, a prediction, that with the introduction of very few additional data sets, and won't take too long to find the ones that have traction, we will begin to see much greater correlation and begin to see the shape of the underlying causal patterns and the flows, and be able to model this a bit better. It won't take long, I imagine. All right, so with that in mind, with some of the questions that Uniform Vision has in some of these initial investigations. How does this look to you? What, as a research problem? What do you think?
Yeah, so I have basically two remarks at that point. And maybe starting with my second thought is there will also be a certain inherent danger in working with this data, being that, as you already mentioned, there are so many signals, or there are so many potential signals in there, including weather, phase of the moon, and whatever you can imagine, that if you fish long enough, you will find something eventually. The question is whether it's true. The second question is whether it is interesting. So there will need to be a big part of the hypothesis-driven approach to that, which basically means what will have to be done in this case is certain hypotheses or certain thoughts that can be supported or not supported from many different angles from the data. So saying that, yes, the law gets passed when it's raining, for example, may be true in that it may come out from the data. It may even be true in a broader sense, in that if you control properly for everything that you should control in your statistics, it may still hold to be true. It may not be interesting, though, and at the same time, it won't really tell you so much because this is a single angle that tells you something. A broader question, and this is just an example, you know, I'm really simplifying here, is to say, do people that are more energetic actually influence the fact that the law gets enacted more? Let's ask it like that. And then you can ask about the impact of the weather, the impact of the caffeine intake, and so on and so forth. And then if all those directions point into the same results or give you the same results, you start thinking that you actually have something that is not just true, but actually interesting. So there will be some danger. There are many low-hanging fruits. Simply grabbing all the possible correlations and just looking for something. It will be a challenge to make sure that what you see is actually true and interesting. So this is the first remark, and then the other one. I'm really curious. I can even say I'm really fascinated by the idea of certain of the impact of the interpersonal and non-official or unofficial channels on how the law ends up manifesting. So if you look at the unofficial network of which state governments or parts of which government know and hang out with which other parts of the government, would you actually see that there is an impact on the law being followed? Or how much can this actually explain? So in other words, the law enactment is something that you observe, but there is something underneath. At the end of the day, it's all people creating those laws and following up and creating teams and working in those teams. So how much is actually a process that is official and to some extent well-structured, and you want to have it well-structured, because at the end of the day, I imagine it should not matter whether I like DASA in how we're working on the law, but probably it actually does. How much this actually can be seen and can influence the results that you have in terms of the law data sets.
So true. So just a statement on why this may be such a good angle for collaboration. What Art was just sort of getting at there, and then Dave, we're just so you can get ready, we're about to transition to you, Alma. But what Art was getting at there is, all data science is not monolithic. It's not one thing. It's not one level of abstraction or one even perspective. And so in the human dynamics group, really we are pursuing something known, I think it's established now as a sort of subdiscipline, computational social science. And when Art's talking about the impact of social relationships on outcomes, just as part of the model of what a system is. That's really where Sandy Pentland, professor under whom we work, has made major impacts, and his new book, Social Physics, is a triumph, frankly, of applying this type of science to social systems and shedding incredible insights into the true nature of this. What are the contours of the system? It's certainly not just quarterly reports and the types of reports and data feeds that we've been looking at. It's very fractured and superficial. So much of it relates to our behavior, our relationships, our communication patterns, and much of that, in fact, is measurable now with the advent of mobile phones and other communications networks, social networks, email, of course, and others, so many others, Wi-Fi connection points, transportation, and others. We can begin to see the patterns of people's flow through groups and people's relationships with others, and by cross-tabulating, in a sense, that with these other questions, economic and psychological, in this case, legal, the insight can be profound. So I encourage you to look at socialphysics.media.mit.edu for some of that, and our lecture in particular there. And that's what we're beginning to get at. Ray Campbell has the same instinct, which is if we could choose something, if there's something that was available in our resources that we could begin to work on, looking at the relationships of people, legislators, looking at the communications patterns, or looking at maybe who introduces it, how is it introduced, the patterns of behavior and relationship in groups between the committees or between states, perhaps. We can somehow get data sets as opposed to, homespun recollections or or other notions or assessments. That could be the richest source of data of them all. And maybe a reaction from the Uniform Commission, and then we will transition to our next segment, which will be basically a victory, like a sprint around uniform electronic legal materials, and we'll take some of these general questions and start really pushing the very particular wins that we derive from data science and tools and methods that we use for it. Any thoughts before we kind of close out the broad canvas, the perspective value of data science for uniform law?
Well, and Peter's for Terry John, I just say it offers some wonderful, there's wonderful landscape out there of possibilities, the concept of who introduced it, how it is introduced, just the effect that the Uniform Law Commission might have on legislators working and legislators in terms of working through this structure, how, whether particular ideas have a time segment in which they peak and then decline, whether, we could track a time lapse between when an issue hits, the primary issue that we talked about, on magazines, and then how much later it takes to get a law that might come out of the discussion, whether there's something there that can be identified and useful in terms of time lapse. There are a whole number of different ways. I really it's going to be very simple to just look at the components and determine which ones are real components, which might be just parallel, kinds of things. But it is for us to contemplate, and so that's what I would say. It will be very, very interesting to hear how it comes into reality through looking at specific acts that we want to back to our common interest.
Well, thank you for that reflection.
So just responding a little bit to our not studio, our worldwide audience on the web. Some people are saying that the audio isn't that great, and let me just say we're doing something a little different here, which is not just bridging between the law and data science, but bridging between like a Google Hangout, Service Express REST interface, and telephone conference, just a normal call. So we're joined by just a conference call. And so, please let us know if you need anything repeated. And in the future, we actually can use technology to make this much better. Like I can actually have an adapter for that phone, so it goes right into the computer. And we'll need to maybe pick that up later. So let's see if Dave there's Dave. Great. May I ask Dave to set up the next segment on UELMA, and I know that we've got the heavy hitters on the act, but the reason why we wanted to highlight this in part was because there's some astonishing work being done here, really right from people that want data upon which data science analytics can be done, to realize the adoption of UELMA and get that law, the authoritative versions of it, published by the states and other jurisdictions, therefore in as open data, in JSON formats, XML formats, and readily accessible formats from directly authoritative source. And the version, of course, makes much more usage of it and regular integration of those data sources onto other systems, regulatory compliance and contracts, so many other systems that depend on or interdepend with law. It could be truly transformational. And so Dave, if you would, just get us started on this. You could start with who you are, and why do you care, if you will? Like, why have you really sunk your teeth into UELMA compliance in such an impressive way? Counselor, it's your mic.
All right, thanks, Daza. By the way, can you see me and or the screen when I put it up?
Sorry. Sorry about that. I think it's yours. It's your mic. Dave was just asking if we could see his screen, and the answer was yes. But then he's just he's off the call, and you're back on. Okay, great. And so yeah, Dave, we can see your screen, and you've got the floor.
So what I'll try to do is, apparently I had a feedback loop, so I apologize. I'm Dave Zvenich. I'm a lawyer in Washington, D.C. At Uniform Law Commissioners. I usually introduce myself as the commissioner or a commissioner from the District of Columbia. I myself am a member of the Uniform Law Commission, and I'm on 2 of the drafting committees and 1 of the study committees mentioned by my fellow commissioners. And to Harriet and to Michelle, hello. I'll see you in July.
Just a quick sound check. Harriet and team, are you able to hear Dave?
Yes.
Okay, terrific. Thanks.
Yes, not very well though.
Yeah, not very well. So you might want to use your, like you're now like bellowing out the Declaration of Independence voice.
Fair enough. I'll use my public speaking voice. So I'm as the lawyer for the DC Council, it's my job to, among other things, oversee the publication of the DC Official Code. And the DC Official Code, and let me see if the screen share works. Bear with me. All right, sharing the desktop. Now this hopefully works. Can you all see my desktop? Can you hear me?
Yep, desktop's on.
All right, and you can hear me?
Yes.
Great. Okay. So this is the DC Official Code. It includes, your traditional provisions. District of Columbia. It's got a bunch of links. It's all very nice and good, and it's available for the public on the website, which is great. But there's a problem, which is how do you know that it's really the law? To give you a sense of why this is actually a big deal, I'm going to turn to the Supreme Court for a minute. The Supreme Court publishes opinions. This is a case called Nautilus. It was published earlier this year on June 2nd. But later in the year, Nautilus was changed. And when I say it was changed, how would you know that? Well, you might not actually know that unless you just happen to be very closely paying attention. I can't actually show you the difference, but trust me, there is a difference between the two. So one of the challenges that UALMA presents is how can you actually know that a law that's presented on the internet is really a law? And this question of authentication is of a special importance to the Uniform Law Commissioners because 2 years ago, or maybe it was now 3 years ago, but not that long ago, the Commission, under the leadership of Michelle Timmons, who is the chair of the committee, passed the Uniform Electronic Legal Materials Act. And the Electronic Legal Materials Act requires essentially 3 things. It requires 1, authentication, 2, preservation, and 3, accessibility. So one of the questions is, how can you ensure compliance with UALMA? And a number of things that UALMA requires is that you be able to make sure that the digital materials have not been altered from the time of publication, and that in fact that it is from the person who it says it is. So we originally were trying to figure out ways that we could comply with UALMA, and Minnesota, I'm going to see if I can do this really fast. It looks like I can. Minnesota came up with a solution that they put out there that allows you to authenticate by essentially going to their website, downloading a file, uploading the file, and then it tells you whether it's valid or not valid, which is totally awesome. But the concern that we had is that it seems that it was it was not flexible for other types of materials. It was PDF exclusively, and also that the source code was sort of limited within Minnesota's website. Although I have to say, we met with Michelle's staff over the winter, and they were extremely helpful in thinking about this problem. And frankly, there's no way we would have gotten to where we are without them. But we said, how can we use Minnesota's model and try to build on top of it? And so over the last several months, we have adopted an open source solution to this problem. So let me just go ahead and demonstrate how this actually might work. So this is a file that I downloaded from the Supreme Court. This is the one that I said exists before. I've dropped it into the internet, and sure enough, it's a valid file. Its document name is 13.369. It's got a hash value and a fingerprint that you can identify that it's coming from us. Now I'm going to drop the other one, which looks very similar. Turns out it's not a valid file. And the way that we do this is essentially as follows. You go to add a file. So this is the one that is valid, and this is the one that isn't valid. You can see here, this is the valid file. And even though the other file looks like it's the same, it really isn't. And the way that computers can distinguish it is through what's called hash values. So they calculate using algorithms that any differences between the two versions will automatically be detected. And it's also surprisingly easy to add files to this system. So I'm going to go ahead and write one right now. This is going to be, don't mind the source code there. This is going to be the UALMA authentication test. I'm going to save it on my desktop as UALMA test.txt. I'm going to go, I'm going to add a file, UALMA test.txt. Submit it. There it is. Now I'm going to check it by going here, punching it in. We have a valid test. Now, I can go ahead and I'm just going to add one space. That's all I'm going to do. I've changed one space. I go back, upload it again, it doesn't match. This program is hosted on GitHub. All of the source code is available. It's essentially costs about $60 a year to run, and a few developers a little bit of time to develop. And once you have the site, you can use it to authenticate any materials, legal or otherwise, in a simple way for the user to validate. And the other cool thing about all of this is that if I go back to this particular example, and I'm trying to shrink my screen a little bit. Let's go to the desktop. All right, let's see if I can do this. There we go. And I want to check the file. All I have to do is go like this. So that's my little demonstration. I'm going to turn it back to me instead of the screen and see if folks have questions.
Thank you, Dave. And so I'm aware that well, at the head offices of the Uniform Law Commission will have a bit of a delay seeing the demo that Dave just conducted online because of the nature of the broadcast part of Google Hangout. But take it from me, like he just showed how the authentication capability, or criteria, I guess we should say, within UELMA can be achieved, and as far as I can tell, very well with from information security perspective, the methods that one would expect to use. A reasonable hash algorithm, and then an encryption of the resulting message digest. Literally what he showed. Standard open source, like accepted cryptography, implemented, by the people that you'd expect. And so, in view of that, I'd like to just ask you all at the Uniform Law Commission to engage a little more on this innovation from one of the jurisdictions to come up with an open source capability to meet the requirements. And I guess if you have any questions specifically about what Dave has done, and questions or comments, right, or observations, start with that, and then I very much would like to take a few minutes to look forward and what this innovation makes possible and the kind of design pattern this could be. The Uniform Law Commissioner, hacker, government official, philosopher king. Like there are quite a few of them now popping up across the United States who are positioned correctly to work up and down the stack of codified law, codified systems, codified data structures. So there's some very interesting long-term potential. I did like you to just be thinking in the back of your mind. First things first, Q&A on Dave's demo.
Michelle, would you like to respond?
Yes, I'd like to respond. I'd like to actually start with maybe a broader concept, though. As I was watching Dave's demo, what was running through my mind is that I'm sure glad that we stuck to our guns about including an outcome-based standard in UELMA. So one of the big debates actually on the floor of the Uniform Law Conference was whether we should select one method of authentication and essentially put that in the Act as the standard method required. And we did not do that. Instead, we wrote into the Act that essentially what the official publisher had to do is provide a tool through which the user of the computer could determine whether they received what the official publisher sent as an official version of the law. And so what was going through my mind is I'm glad I stuck to my guns on that point, because here's an example that existing technology can be used to improve on methods that were in place at the time we wrote the act.
And this is Dave. I think not only is it a credit to the thinking about having a technology neutral solution and the standards-based solution, but also by, frankly, the work that Minnesota did to sort of, and California as well, to take this on seriously, identify what are the key minimum requirements, was extremely useful in working with developers to try to figure out what solutions could make sense for our particular ecosystem. What I'm really excited about is that now we will have a tool that will allow us to basically click a single button and authenticate each and every section of the code and the entire code, all by just a single click of the right person with the right credentials. So it's a really exciting thing, and it's a credit to basically your leadership in making sure that it was written in the way that it is. It's also kickstarted the conversation among legal publishers, as you well know, to making sure that we do this the right way. And if it hadn't been for the Uniform Law Commission to sort of push this along, I very much thought that conversation would move as fast and as far as it has gone.
That was kudos to the commission on sticking to your guns and creating this act. So consider, if I may just tie this in to what's happening tomorrow here at the Legal Hackathon. Tomorrow we will have Ben Kalos, who's a city council member of New York City Council, and Mike Farrell, who's the equivalent in San Francisco, supervisor in San Francisco, both of whom have been leaders in causing open data and open government, including the use of open source alternatives sometimes within government, and seeking to have more of the official business of government done online in a way that's safe but also more effective. This group is attempting to put the law online in a very real way. That these two leaders are part of a new thing called the Free Law 5 with 3 other jurisdictions, where they just self-organized to have a better chance at achieving, through a common approach, how to stage and phase the publishing of their city ordinances online. There's quite a lot to it. Legislation to codification and down the whole pipeline, as you know. And Dave has been a leader in that group. One of the 5 is District of Columbia, and Dave is the representative. He sits in one of the 5 chairs. So I hope that there is an opportunity here with UELMA in particular, to have a channel that remains open with NUFUSL. I'm sorry, with the Uniform Law Commission is the new better branding, so that we can take guidance from you, and that also we can show you what we're doing here in this example, realizing by using the criteria to get past the barrier to having the law be online and also having that be the official version, been a major inhibitor to slow down the drivers toward this progress. And the criteria, which are, I think, wise and well-tuned, that you eventually articulated in the statute, are some of the best of uniform law in a tough emerging area, where you're not kind of just harmonizing several states that have done kind of the same thing but a little different. You've had to do original thinking, and we'd very much like to leverage our relationship with you so that you can see how this one's emerging and perhaps see something in it of a design pattern of how other uniform law may also be able to have a deeper longitudinal engagement with the right people across the country. So its adoption, that the business, legal, and technical levels are a part of a more of a holistic view the life cycle of your acts and the long tail that they have.
It's very interesting, Dad. I mean, what we've learned as a society from the scientific method is that most of our societally beneficial discoveries really come from multidisciplinary thinking, thinking across disciplinary lines. And this is really an opportunity for us to do that and to see different approaches, different cross-sections, different perspectives. And it's really great that Dave could participate as strongly as in the UELMA kind of processes and what he brings to it in terms of his background and his knowledge from a couple of disciplines, and then to see this put into a structure, the laboratory of our lawmaking, and to see it be so beneficial. So it's exhilarating to see that this might continue to be a productive source of interaction. So we're happy to continue to work with you on this.
Outstanding. So Dave and our friends at the Uniform Law Commission, please indulge one very rapid little demo here. I'm going to show you what one of the people who just came out of the woodwork and showed up at the session put together using a semantic markup technique he wasn't sure what law to do. I said, oh, I know. You apply your technique to UELMA. And here's an example of what happens when you mark up, in this case, not in XML, but in a different semantic markup, a statute. And when the authoritative version is available as a service, that's an open service, like a public infrastructural service in a very real sense, from the authoritative source, the things you can do with semantic markup in different ways. I've actually rendered it incorrectly. Okay, so sorry, Jim. I just kind of like hosed his demo here. But it's on the Hackpad, and come back to the site for this session on our blog here to see one innovator's take on how to mark up UELMA itself in a way that literally can serve as a source of rules for like business rule systems, enterprise systems that may one day integrate and configure software like Dave's, where when we can source up and down requirements and constraints from higher levels of abstraction to lower, and your 256-bit encryption today may be deemed to be comparable or the equivalent or the required minimum for a given criterion at a higher level in the statute. We can start having like a better traceability and better, therefore, I think, measurability and better analytic capabilities for people like Arik and others to see what the true nature of the underlying patterns and flows, the model of the system that the law is operating in, and finally feedback loops to perfect that law as needed, when there's error, when there's issues or feedback loops are not hitting, or it's become, I don't know, antiquated or having unintended consequences perhaps. And then finally to look at what the best practices are down in industry and nonprofits, many of which are codified as rules, right? But they don't show up as statutes. They don't even show up sometimes as contracts quite. They show up as policy in enterprise architecture. They show up as standards and protocols and configurations for the Federation of Identity Systems and of data services. They show up as something that's adjacent to the rules as you currently understand it, but one day may be a very important function that NCUSL serves. It's one of the dimensions of the law. And so I think it's a very rich source, a rich vein that Dave's invented here. And it's going to allow many of us from many disciplines, as you've observed at NCUSL, to be able to speak directly to one another, apples to apples. And may our conversation be as productive and harmonious as your lawmaking. So with that, I'd like to hand it back to you, Harriet, to help close out the session and bring us home.
Well, I think what you just said was a very good end to the session. It's really very beneficial for us, as I indicated, to change ideas. And when you bring it into this the different structures. I mean, one of the things that we try to do through our methodology is to model decision making in a quasi-governmental body that is functional and that works, because some people are concerned that we don't have enough of those models in our governmental sources. And creative ways of looking at it, as Dave and Michelle have demonstrated, it's not just the subject matter, it's not just the very substance of what's being done, but the structure of it and what is left open for, like, you know, development and what is not left open for development, what the restrictions are, where, you know, how this can work. So there are all of these different facets to look at. I mean, that aren't just language, you know, and concept. There's the structure of ideas and themselves. And so we've really been an organization that has tried to maximize public input and to try to come up with better solutions, to drill down on where problems are and how we can look at them. And this is really just an incredible horizon for us to test things against. And we're really delighted to see, you know, this kind of focus that is showing us new ways of looking at things. And I know it's going to be mutually beneficial.
Here, here. And so it already is. And so thank you again for your generous time. So many of you, I know, boy, you got to the billable rates alone. But more to the point, the service, you know, the service that you're rendering to the country. I know you've got a lot of things to do, and we're grateful for your time. And I encourage everybody online, think about this. Pose your questions, pose your comments, and share forward through the open method, the open forum that we've created with legalhackathon.org, your feedback about not only the particular things that we've been looking at, but certainly Dave's demo and the adoption of UELMA, but also the broader research questions. What could a hard and yet tractable problem be that we could unleash the genius of people like Aragon? What are the right data sets that maybe are latent within maybe other systems, communication systems of Google, the email metadata, who knows what, I don't, public switch system, and let us think about it, like just all comers, you know, like this is, I hereby grant permission, invitation, and solicitation to get crazy and get innovative and give us your ideas. We can evaluate them. And I think with Nakuzel on our side, we're unlikely to do anything rash. So, and so with that, I thank you all. Dave, thanks for your time and sharing your fresh innovation. Ara, thank you for sharing your perspectives as well.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
Great.
See you tomorrow.
Yep, see you tomorrow. There'll be a plenary wrap-up later today, and tomorrow you don't want to miss the session with Ben Kalos.
All right.
Until then, we'll see you all online.
All right.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Evan. Bye.